Well, thanks for joining me today. We're going to be going through a little bit of, we've been talking about human sexuality, talking about love, talking about marriage, talking about how we can live out God's plan through marriage in the self-giving of sexuality to one another as love-giving and life-giving. There is always controversy when it comes to the church, because people look at the church as being against homosexuality. And we've said this once before, I want to say it again. When two people come to the Roman Catholic Church and they say, we want to get married, it's very the same even in the Greek Orthodox Church, where people are going to say, we do not marry people of the same sex because you cannot give life. Two people of the same sexual orientation, of the same sex, cannot produce children. Two men, two women. So that's why the church will say we do not marry people of the same sex. So that's really the end of the story. We're going to read tonight we're going to read about marriage. We're going to take one of those chapters from Do You Really Want to Know? And the book really comes out of this idea that sometimes people want to look at the teachings of the church, they want to go at the teachings of the church, but they really don't want to know what the plain and simple teaching is. And very often it comes down to the idea of what is the nature of sexuality? What is the nature of abortion? What is the nature of euthanasia? And if it comes down very simple to, does it go against what we believe to be the natural law of things? For sexuality, and we saw this in the video yesterday, a lot of people say, well, sex stands as a way of fulfilling my desire. And very simply, we're going to look at what happens when we take that gift of human sexuality and we distort it to fit into our own preferences. We have defined love as willing the good of another person. That comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. John Paul II had a vision of the body as the visible sign of the invisible God. And that's what he called the sacrament of the body, or sacramentality of the body. That very simply, that we take the body and it is a manifestation of God's love. And we live out God's love through the self-giving of marriage. We live through the self-giving of sexuality, love-giving and life-giving. Very simple. If you were to ask, and we're going to ask you at one point, to maybe try to defend some of these different teachings of the church and to say, why does the church teach this or why does the church teach that? It will come very simply down to, does it do this or does it do that? And for sexuality, is it about love-giving and is it about life-giving? Okay, that becomes very, very important. Now, as we move to the fifth slide on theology of the body into this, we used to use theology of the body for teens as our guide. Today, we just kind of use a lot of the terms that they will define as kind of like our guideline as we go through this book. We've already established that love is not merely a feeling, okay? It is an act of the will that consists of preferring what is the good of others to the good of myself. Okay, very simple. I prefer what is best for you as opposed to what is best for me. We can't judge the value of love by emotion. Because if we look at love as an emotion, it comes and goes. And this is probably the high point of the movie Fireproof. The main point of that whole movie is, how do you love a person in marriage? You love them whether you like them or whether you don't like them, whether you feel good about them, whether you don't feel good about them. There are going to be many times in which we're going to be involved in relationships. We know about our parents doing this for us, parents doing that for us. They don't judge what they do for us. They don't pay our Kellenberg tuition, whether they're mad at us or whether they're not mad at us. They do things for us. They take care of us. They feed us. They give us a home to live. Why? Because of that love. And that love doesn't wax or wane. It remains constant when we truly love one another. In the 1950s, John Paul II is going to write this book called Love and Responsibility. He was still Kara-Wojtyła. He was, I believe at the time, he might have been Archbishop of Krakow. And he had a series of lectures. And from that, he's going to come up with this book called Love and Responsibility. In it, he's going to link love to the virtue of chastity. And he's going to say that chastity is the sure way to happiness, because it's self-giving of ourselves. It's going to look at this purity of love. It's going to look at what we're going to give to each other, not based on my desire, but based on my will to do what is best for you. Chastity is this, okay? Know this definition. It is the virtue that directs our desire, our sexual desire, and it brings us towards the truth of love. It is based on purity, and is going to say yes to the demands of love. It is going to be part of this virtuous action that we look at the other person and say, what do I give to the other human being? Not based on what I want, based on my needs, on my using the other person, but based on the ultimate good of you and the ultimate good of myself. We have vice, which we've gone through in the Enneagram. We have all of these different things in which bring us away from goodness, bring us away from God. And then you have virtue. All of these are habits. We study the Enneagram because we want to understand what are the things that I constantly do. What are these habits that I do? And do I do good or do I do bad? And that very simply is about practice. Human beings are created basically to become these creatures of habit, because we just fall into these things that we find comfortable all the time. And we act, unfortunately, sometimes without thinking. In yesterday's video on sexuality, it says, man seldom thinks about sex. And he's not saying, do we contemplate it? Are we lusting? Are we desiring? No, he's not saying that. Do we think about it? Meaning, am I rationally thinking about what and how I'm supposed to do with my sexuality? And that is really what this whole thing implies. What am I doing? We know that animals simply go and do whatever they want because of their instinct. For us, we think about what we have and think about what we do. So we have virtue, which is the habit of doing good, and vice or sin, which is the habit of doing what is not good. Temperance. Temperance is our virtue of controlling our desire for pleasure. We think about temperance all the time. Do I control what I spend? Do I control how I act? Do I go out with my friends? We live in this culture of, we talked about this, about gaming, pre-gaming. There's this thought that not only am I going to go out and drink, but I'm going to drink before I drink. And I find that to be one of the most crazy things in this world. I see my own son do this, and he's like, yeah, we're going to pregame. Do you mind? It's like, pregame? You drink before you drink. I do not pregame. I game. That is an important thing to think about. Do I have temperance? When I go out and I drink, there's a reason. We see the Gospels and we see this beautiful exchange of relationship with Jesus at the table. And his own mother asks him to create wine. She would not ask to create wine if this alcohol was evil. It was meant to be enjoyed. It was meant to share with one another, meant to be at the center of the table. If you did not have it, you would say, this is a shame. Do we see Jesus say, hey, Mom, let's have a couple of shots of our wine? Sexuality. Do I understand what it is that my sexuality is? Is there a temperance? Do I think before I act? We live in this culture where I want to buy it. I don't think about it. And we end up with so many things that we don't even want. I think that's the same thing with sexuality. We end up in relationships and we regret it later on because we don't think before we act. In the hookup culture, people's hearts are broken because we're not really truly doing what it is that we're supposed to do with this other person. We're not thinking before we act. And we said yesterday, that was Frank Sheed's quote, where like we're not thinking about what we're doing, we're just simply doing. John Paul II is also going to use what we're going to call the personalistic norm, a term that he used which is going to explain that human beings deserve to be treated in the best way. Not about desire, not about what that I want for the time being. No, I treat them to be the ultimate of who they are and for what they are supposed to be. We should never treat anyone with less than love. And think about what that means again. I'm treating them in the sense of, I think we have a cat behind us. I think she's fascinated by this talk. That's Claire. I think people have been waiting to see one of the cats, and I think she wants to hear the sexuality talk. she is neutered, so she's out. Anyway, so she's done. See, that hurts her feelings. She hates that. But the idea of love, what does love mean? That I treat you in the best way possible, in the best way possible. And I treat you with your good in mind and how I'm supposed to treat you, not about my desire, not about your desire, but what is best for you. There's an old expression, it takes two to tango. Two people are dating. It's not about one person saying, well, I want sex and I don't want sex. No, usually the two people, unless there's a forced situation, two people they're filled with desire, but is it what is best for each one? That becomes the heart of this. Tomorrow we're going to talk about dating, going through the stages of dating today. What brings two people together is desire. But do I control my desire? Do I control how I act? Do I control what's going on in my heart and what's going on in my body? Very important. He's going to describe 3 different aspects of love. Love as attraction, love as desire, and love as goodwill. Okay, these are 3 very important things. Love as attraction. What do we mean by that? John Paul used these 3 terms. Love as attraction is this. It is recognizing the good of another person and seeing the inner beauty. Like, why are we attracted to a person? Well, it just can't be about the superficial facade. It can't be just about, as people say, hot or not. It's about, do I understand the goodness of the person? And I always tell people, especially men, do you treat your girlfriend as you would your own sister to be treated? And I think that's important. Do we understand how they are supposed to be treated? Do we understand that, do we have the good in mind of this other person as if someone was taking out someone that we loved and that we cared for? And do we truly care for them in that same way? As a big brother, I remember being very protective of my own sister and telling her very often, oh, you're not dating him. You are not going to do this. And because you knew what this person was like. You saw them hanging out at the party. You saw them at the bar. You saw them doing all these things, and you were like, oh no. Oh no, you don't. And that becomes very much the same thing. Are you treating your girlfriend or your boyfriend with that same respect that you would want someone to take care of, someone very, very close, someone very, very close to you? See, no one wants to hear me in the house. They've totally shut me out. Now, I think they've locked the door, but that's okay. 2, love as desire. Wanting what is good for yourself, desiring good and desiring happiness. And what do we really want for in our relationships? That becomes very, very important. So think about that. Love as attraction, recognizing the inner beauty of the person. 2, love as desire. Wanting. There's a desire. I want what is good for myself, and I want what is good for you. That becomes important. Finally, love as goodwill. Willing or desiring. Think about this, right in the word. Willing or desiring what is good for you. And we also call this type of love agape or agape. The Christian love where Christ is willing to sacrifice himself for the good of humanity. Giving of himself. We are attracted to people. Why? Because we see the beauty of that person. But do we want to ask ourselves, do we see the inner beauty of the person? The exterior beauty of a person fades. If you see, there was an actress in the 1970s, Cheryl Ladd, and my wife, Mrs. Basile, the other day saw her on TV at one of these Lifetime movies, and Cheryl Ladd was one of Charlie's Angels. Now we know there've been many different versions of this, and so she's like, I'm so sad because that's Cheryl Ladd. Well, Cheryl Ladd is no longer as she was when she was part of Charlie's Angels. She's totally changed. Beauty can change. Beauty can wax and wane. Love should not wax or wane. So, willing the good of another person. Here's our problem. That we often think that the opposite of love is hate. The opposite of love is using another human being. We use others for what we want. When we hate them, we cast them away. We don't want any part of them. We get rid of them. We push them away from our lives. This is very different. Utilitarianism is using other people for our own gain. This is the problem, that we bring people into our lives and say, what are you useful for to me? And this becomes one of our greatest challenges. How do I face my relationships? How do I look at my relationships and use, as we said, love as attraction, desiring the other person, but the inner beauty, and the other part of like desiring goodness and happiness, and then finally willing the good of others, not using, but loving. We'll leave it there today. Have a great day. Thank you for coming to the conference today. I'll put this online so you can refer back to it. The main purpose of John Paul's theology is to rethink the way that we treat each other. Have a great day. Thanks.